Tymgad was originally built for retired Roman soldiers serving nearby to settle. And it reveals a lot about how Rome put down roots far from Italy and how its identity and culture flourished at the fringes of the empire.
I'm beginning to get my bearings now. This must have been one of the main gateways into the town. When you first walk in, it looks a terrible jumble, actually. But almost instantly, you come to a cross street. You can see another paved street on an absolute grid pattern.
This must be one of the best surviving examples of Roman town planning anywhere in the empire. It's a pretty aggressive statement of Romanness in the middle of the desert, which means it's not that hard for me to find my way around.
And I guess I'm now in a little house and a rather splendid door. This is a truly regal set of Roman loos. It's on the standard multi-seater pattern. You get a little bit of privacy from these rather natty dolphins here. It's a nice thought, I think, that one of the poshest sets of loos anywhere in the Roman world is still to be found in Algeria. Ooh. What I've got in my sights now is a rather grand building coming up, the grandest we've seen, really, with a whole load of columns. Which is worth exploring, I think. Rather posh entrance courtyard. What on earth is it? This is really interesting. It's a biblioteca, it's a library. If that's the case, it must be, this is a very, very rare example of a surviving public, presumably, library from the Roman world. It's very smart. Sort of, it's quite interesting that we've come into this town and the first monument we really met is indeed a monument to culture, the public library. I think if I'd been a citizen of Tymgad, this is where I would have spent my time if I'd been allowed. My guess is that this library was a pretty blokish community.
It might have started off as a Roman soldier's retirement home, but within just a few generations of its birth, Tymgad had expanded well beyond its original foundations, home to over 10,000 reasonably peaceful inhabitants of Roman, African and Berber descent. You might expect to see a very filtered down version of Romanness here, and yet we find quite the opposite.
This is the main square, the forum, the centre of business life, commerce, law and local government. What's striking is it actually looks so standard. Anyone visiting here from Roman Italy would have instantly recognised this as the Forum. And yet, we're just on the edge of the Sahara. Whoever designed this must have been working from some kind of kit for Roman forums. Or actually, a kit for a whole Roman town. You really do get the feeling that the people of Tymgad are investing unusually heavily in high culture and in their Roman identity. All around the forum, all around town, there are thousands of inscriptions proclaiming the Romanness of the inhabitants. But the man who really caps it all for culture is this man, Vocontius. And it's actually written not in the usual capital letters that you see on inscriptions, but in the lowercase that you get in manuscripts. So it's as if you're reading a book here. Now, instead of the usual CV that you'd expect under his statue, you get an elaborate hymn of praise to Vocontius's culture. The Ordo, the local council, has put this up to him. It's the council of the town that lives next to a spring that brings it water. But Vacontius is a spring, they say, that brings them something more. He's their other source. What he's a source of is not water, it's culture, literature, and eloquence.
Here, on the margins of the Empire, the people of Timgad are as committed as anyone else to showing they are Romans.
All these mosaics come from the floors of buildings in Timgad, and they give you some idea of what the original colour of the place must have been like. And also the richness.
We might call this Roman soft power. Most of the people who lived in Timgad would never actually have seen Rome. But they're using their Romanness as a badge of honour, a way of showing they belong.
That must come from a little bath building. Have a good bath, it says. And I suppose it means flip-flops only in here. And here we've got some of the classic scenes of Roman mythology. There's the goddess Venus up there, rising from the ocean and balanced a bit awkwardly on the bum of a sea monster. And there is the god Neptune rowing his trident. He's the god of the sea. What's interesting is that there are artists around here who can produce this kind of stuff. And the people of Timgad are literally at home with it. They're really unmistakably doing the Roman thing. I'm sure there must have been awful quarrels going on here, but on the surface, Timgad looks a pretty happy little place. And that's summed up by this bit of pavement art. What it is a gaming board with words written across. In fact, you move your piece from letter to letter. And the words make a slogan. Venare lavari, hunting and bathing. Ludere ridere, gaming and laughing. Orchest vivere, that's living. Kind of makes you realise how far this place and its inhabitants have come. They started out as a bunch of top ex-squaddies. A few generations later, they're not just hunting and bathing, they're bookworms in the local library. And they're visiting a rather posh local lavatory with dolphin fittings.
In some ways, it didn't matter how far from the centre of the empire you were. Being Roman meant belonging, if you had lots of money. By allowing the local elite into the club, Rome secured their support. In return, the local rich felt part of a bigger world. And it's here in Algeria that we have one of the most extraordinary cases of how one could climb the greasy pole of Roman political power.
This is a really proud boast of success. It's a standout memorial designed to show just how far you could go, even if you were brought up on the margins of the empire, in what's now rural Algeria. It's put up by a man called Quintus Lollius Urbicus, to his dad, to his mum, his brothers, and his uncle. But most of all, it's put up to himself.
We know precious little about Urbicus's roots, whether he was of Roman or Berber descent, or perhaps both. What we do know is that he grew up just a few kilometres away from the family mausoleum in the small, remote Roman town of Tidis, and his family were Roman citizens.
You can tell it's Roman because of all these winged willies.
Even in its heyday, Tidis is unlikely to have had more than 1,000 inhabitants. It's more of a village than a town. And I doubt that it was particularly well known in Algeria. No one else in the Roman world would even have heard of it.
This really must take the prize for being the smallest forum in the whole of the Roman Empire. Local offices there, loads of plinths that once carried statues of emperors and local bigwigs. This one was actually the statue of a rather important local Roman lady. But here was the statue to the biggest local bigwig of them all, Quintus Lollius Urbicus. The statue's lost, but you can see where his feet would have been, perhaps in marble, maybe even in bronze. And it's underneath that, on this plinth, that you find his CV written out. It's terribly abraded now, but you can just about feel the letters. You can see his name here, Lollius Urbicus. And you can see that, well, you can feel that he was consul, cos. And then underneath, you get loads of the other things that he did in his life, the offices he held. We learn that he was a bit of a war hero. He served in the expedition against Judea with the Emperor Hadrian, and he seems to have won military decorations, a sort of honorific spear and a golden crown. It's a bit like a Purple Heart or an MC. He's the biggest thing that ever came out of Tidis. He's the local boy who really made good, and no one made gooder. And round here, he would have been absolutely exceptional. What we've got to remember, though, is that there were thousands of people like Lollius Urbicus in the Roman Empire, going from provincial towns to make it big in the city itself and in the army. In some ways, for me, that's what's exceptional about the Roman Empire.
The story of Urbicus doesn't end here. If we follow his trail, Urbicus takes us about as far away from Africa as you could possibly get in the Roman Empire.